find that the dance or the juggle between economic survival on the one hand and sort of interesting, meaningful work is obviously, it's the challenge. It's a massive challenge, and it is sort of been the challenge for a long time. What we tend to do, I think, is emphasise one and defer the other. I've had a lot of different experiences through life. I've changed directions a lot in career, and I wanted to be an astrophysicist or an astronautical engineer. I was good at maths and physics, and I ended up doing well at school, and I could do anything I wanted to do, could have done medicine, law, whatever. As soon as I hit university, that first year, it just wasn't presented in such a way that it sort of spoke to me anymore.
Oh, yeah, okay.
That was a really major experience. That process of being lost for a while, not knowing what I wanted, and trying things out. I was, helping on work sites and making furniture. I ended up sort of dropping the PhD idea, going into building a house. At a certain point, I was working in lots of different areas in radio and various places and teaching at university, like as a tutor or as casual. And then I decided at a certain point, financially, I needed a proper job, and I decided to try for the public service at that point. I still do some university teaching. My partner's got a consultancy, and that involves me doing facilitating and presenting complicated ideas to corporates and organisations. I also do my own research. I allocate a certain amount of time to sort of actually building and making things. The world of work is changing. We actually don't know what the jobs are going to look like. We tend to narrow people too early. I think we tend to specialise people and stream people too early. One of the things about the emerging world of work is that reality and our expectations don't meet necessarily, and things just don't pan out. There's been a huge shift away from the organisation being a place that provided structure to structure being something that people are all forced to create for themselves now. This kind of burden that individuals are having to carry now for making structure for themselves, making routines for themselves, working out what's going on, certainly working out their own careers, because there's no pathway. It's an unreasonable expectation to have people choose a pathway so early when they haven't explored or don't know what's out there. The educational model that we have still sits within a production line type, shape people early for particular slots in the world. The schooling system emphasises unconsciously certain values around competition, around specialisation and around expertise, where these things are the things that are seen to be the ones that will eventually make you successful in life. There's sort of competition as a value embedded in that whole process. As long as you are ranking students against each other, you are basically promoting values around hierarchy and competition. Even more subtle part of the system, we teach subjects or units or skills in chunks. We can come up with all these fantastic lists of the skills required for the 21st century, but that's probably, ways of carving things up that will equate to being, competent or have capacity in this complex world. Whereas the basic problem is we can't teach these things in isolation. It's very artificial to create an object like a skill. It's a construct that we make to do that. We do it because it makes it easier to measure and to get someone to teach it, and it makes timetabling easier and all that sort of stuff. I think that's the rationalist dream, that if we can carve the world up into particular pieces, then we're able to exert a certain amount of control over. So the reality ends up producing people that are divided in themselves and societies that are shaped around a sharp divide between home and work.
Yep.
And we have to think about schooling as not just about the transmission of knowledge, maybe be thinking about schooling in terms of experiences and opportunities for young people to probe, to experiment, to show their curiosity. What we have to be aware of is that when we do that we're looking through the world in a particular way. There are different models of being, and each of them have their own rationality and their own emotionality. So what the task is to acknowledge that there are some things that you can have very mechanical solutions to. There are some things that you can use standard operating procedures for, but then there are some aspects that we actually don't know how to fix. We don't even really understand the nature of the interconnections between things. So you have to sort of operate differently in that. It sort of takes a bit more of a experimental approach and more of a humility approach. The more that education contributes to people who come out into the world and do not just extract profit for themselves, the more that it produces people who somehow give back. The more that you promote competition as opposed to cooperation and collaboration, the more that you promote an individualistic model, which economics does most of the time, the more that you're detracting from social capital. In your model, I would say. Social capital is about the kinds of relationships that people have, the way people are, essentially the way that people are tied into their various networks and places. The idea is that the social contains within it all these sort of resources, which we draw on. There was one person who was a big influence on me, who was an academic at RMIT, and it was really important for me in lots of ways because he was a very unconventional academic and he really embraced the kind of interdisciplinarity, and he had a really wide, broad-ranging knowledge, and he encouraged me to think broadly and to be creative in my thinking. He gave me the confidence that it was okay to dwell in the messiness of things. For example, not knowing the answer to a question. Well, I'm not sure myself, and that's okay, so maybe we'll try and figure it out together. Or to model the idea that there's a lot of uncertainty. There aren't simple answers to certain kinds of questions, that it's okay not to know. What's important is maybe how you go about finding out, or how you go about exploring, or how you go about being a kind of implicit researcher all the time. I think we're very influenced by the dominant cultural narratives or stories. One, I think, is around what a successful life trajectory looks like. It can be around the sort of being in full-time work, having paid off the house, having the children at a certain age, having the packaged up family in a certain way by a certain time. And if people don't achieve those, then it can generate a lot of anxiety for people. Everyone juggles the issue of money and meaning. People just have different ways of answering that juggle. We're always juggling pressures, needs, these desires between security on the one hand and meaning and fulfillment on the other. And I think it's about unpacking and uncovering that for different people. So there's a whole bunch of decisions around maybe not chasing the dollar or the traditional forms of status that come with organisational, roles and titles and things like that.
And how we measure that success.
Yeah, values are built into those stories, which we most of the time I think unconsciously adopt. Our education system engenders that story in the way that children are prepared for work. Rhetorically, there's been more to education for a long time about developing people as a full person. And when it comes down to it, the work imperative or the need to shape young people for the labour market is really quite a strong force. Stories and the values and the dominant way of thinking about what success is, if you like, emergent from a particular economic system of how work and home is developed. It's symptomatic but also, very much a part of that context as well. It wouldn't work unless the culture was constantly creating people who think like that. If you were to measure yourself with some of those markers, those cultural markers of success, even if you have even have your more wholesome markers of success, which you've created, you're still going to get disappointed. It's okay for our career paths to meander. They will anyway, more and more. Exploring for more meaningful ways of living out your work life, experimenting with different things. The point is they attain some coherence through being able to draw all the disparate elements together and make a coherent story. It's definitely a capacity that people are going to need to be able to weave them together into something. The thing to try and practice at school is to practice doing experiments, try things out and extract the most out of those things. How do you teach people to experiment? A kind of a capacity and a set of, a way of doing things which would involve many different skills, and something which you could only see in the practice of it. There's a certain kind of patience and persistence that's built into this. Resilience is a really interesting thing. It's a whole bunch of things coming together, isn't it? Like you can't
It's not just grit.
teach resilience no. And then, okay, let's do a test. Are you resilient? Aren't you resilient? The test of whether you're actually resilient is if you are able to sort of bounce back from major disappointments or difficulties in life, live out ideals and ideas. We need to practice that coping with messiness is important. Try and actually live your life in a way that exemplifies that, or try it out. I think you can only learn